don't forget that you're listening to Night Air.
I accompanied a friend to a party with her co-workers, although I'm not one to attend these kinds of events. She insisted, as she wasn't going through a good time, and I agreed. The party had started early with a barbecue, and when we tried to get there, we realized the navigation app had taken us down the wrong route. We corrected our path, but instead of getting closer, we ended up even further away in unfamiliar streets. The app directed us to a dark avenue, and without realizing it, we found ourselves in front of the entrance to a cemetery. My friend and I exchanged confused glances, as this couldn't possibly be the right destination, but the map insisted that we had arrived at the correct place. My friend looked at me intently and asked me to remain silent. "Listen," she said urgently. Confused, I tried to respond, but she interrupted me again. "Listen," she repeated, with an urgency that gave me chills. Before I could say anything else, she turned off the car, leaving us in complete darkness. A shiver ran through my body, as the last thing I wanted at that moment was to be stranded in that place. Just as I was about to protest, a sound froze us completely. A wailing. A woman's wail that didn't come from the radio, nor from anywhere visible, but from the very air around us. It was a spectral, heart-wrenching sound, so real that it made me hold my breath. We had barely processed what we were hearing when we both screamed in unison. In front of the car, just at the edge of the headlight's beam, a woman appeared, motionless. I can't explain it, but her presence wasn't natural. Her silhouette seemed to blur with the fog, and before we could react, her figure launched towards us with an impossible speed. Time seemed to stop for a second, and in an instant, we saw her pass through the car as if she were a shadow. A whitish flash crossed from one side of the vehicle to the other and disappeared into the darkness. Without thinking twice, my friend started the engine and accelerated, not looking back. We didn't care where we were going, we just wanted to get out of there. We drove aimlessly for several minutes until we finally found a familiar avenue. Neither of us spoke during the return trip. When we got home, my mother saw how pale we were and made us some tea to calm us down. "Those things happen when you don't believe in God," she said calmly, as if she knew exactly what we had experienced. After we had calmed down a bit, we decided to check the address in the app. The strangest thing of all was that the address for the party was only a block away from where we had initially arrived. We never understood what made us end up at the cemetery. To this day, I still can't explain what we really saw. In a completely different context. It happened in my family's house, located in an old neighborhood. It was a house with history, inhabited by several generations before us. When my parents decided to move there, I was 14 years old and an only child. Shortly after settling in, my parents told me I was going to have a sibling. That's when the preparations to welcome him began. At first, the house just seemed like an old building, full of the usual creaks and noises that come with age. However, as the months went by, we realized there was something more. A presence that could be felt, but none of us wanted to acknowledge. The first few months were relatively quiet, but everything changed as my brother's arrival grew near. My mother had to be hospitalized a few days before giving birth, so my father spent most of his time with her. A friend of my mother and an aunt helped prepare the baby's room. That night, for the first time in a long time, I stayed home alone. I decided to distract myself playing video games until I fell asleep. When I woke up, I heard the front door open. I wasn't alarmed at first, thinking it was my father returning from the hospital. However, when I called out and asked if everything was okay, I got no response. That's when I realized something was very wrong. Fear paralyzed me when I saw my bedroom door wide open. I heard heavy footsteps approaching down the hallway, but they weren't my father's. I can perfectly recognize the sound of his footsteps, and these had a tired rhythm, as if something were dragging itself along. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I thought about getting up to close the door, but the terror of encountering whatever was walking around the house left me frozen. Suddenly, I saw a hunched shadow slowly move toward the baby's room. Something was covering it entirely with a greyish blanket. For a second, my mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It looked like a cartoon ghost, but the sense of weight, of real presence, made me understand this wasn't a joke. Panic took over me when I saw the figure enter the baby's room and close the door behind it. It was pure survival instinct that made me act. I grabbed my phone to call my dad, but at that moment, I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. Without hesitation, I ran to the front door without looking back, feeling the weight of an invisible gaze on the back of my neck. I burst outside and found my father getting out of the car. I shouted, panicked, that someone was inside the house. His expression changed immediately. He grabbed a metal bar he used for changing tires and went in with determination. He asked me to wait outside, but every second of not knowing what was happening made me feel worse. Only a few minutes passed, though they felt eternal. Finally, I heard my father's voice call from inside, "Come in." Something in me hesitated. My instinct screamed not to do it, but I gathered my courage and stepped through the door. When I reached the dining room, my father looked at me with a furrowed brow. "There's nothing," he said seriously, but I was sure of what I had seen. I pointed toward the baby's room and explained what had happened. My father turned his head in that direction, and it was at that exact moment that we saw it. Behind the slightly open door, something or someone covered by a sheet was silently watching us. Before we could react, the door slammed shut. My father cursed and ran toward the room. He pushed the door open and turned on the light, searching every corner desperately. I, trembling, peeked in fear. But the room was completely empty. There was no trace of anyone, and the window was shut from the inside. We stood there in silence, trying to find a logical explanation, but there wasn't one. That night, my father and I decided not to talk about what had happened. My mother came back from the hospital with the baby a few days later, and peace seemed to return to the house, but only for a while. A few weeks later, the sounds came back. They weren't just footsteps at night anymore, but heavy, desperate breathing, like something was trapped within the walls. The worst part was when the baby cried at night. In those moments, the breathing grew more intense, almost like something was waiting on the other side of the wall. My father and I would exchange worried looks, but neither of us wanted to be the first to say it. We didn't know how to explain to my mother what was happening without sounding crazy. We decided to wait and keep watch. But the problem with the unexplainable is that sooner or later, it becomes impossible to ignore. Always, at all times, one of us made sure the baby was never alone in the room, even during the day. Everything was going fine until one day, after an exhausting afternoon, I fell asleep. At some point, my mum placed the baby in the crib in that room, thinking he needed to start getting used to sleeping on his own. That afternoon, quiet like all the others on that street, seemed peaceful. But a scream filled with terror woke me up instantly. I ran out of my room and saw my mother trying to open the baby's bedroom door. "Someone's in there with the baby! Someone's in there with the baby!" she screamed non-stop. I rushed to help her, kicking the door with all my strength. My mum told me not to leave her side and said she would try to get in through the window. While she stepped away, I kept struggling with the door until suddenly someone opened it from the inside. Falling to the floor, I lost my balance and entered the room near the crib. There, I clearly saw some stuffed bears, filthy and wrinkled. When I looked up, I saw a figure. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It looked so ancient it had lost all its facial features, yet it smiled as it stared at me. It held onto the crib with both hands, close to the baby who wouldn't stop crying. It was the same figure as always, but this time it lifted the sheet from its forehead as if it wanted us to see its face. At that moment, my mum managed to open the window and the figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. so fast that my mother didn't see it. I stood there, frozen, trying to understand what had just happened, while my mum and I stared at each other in terror. Then, my mum called my dad and my grandparents, who lived nearby and were the first to arrive. As soon as they stepped into the room, my grandmother shouted, full of disbelief and curses, asking what that object was doing there. She was referring to a crucifix on the wall behind the crib. "Who put that there?" she asked. My mum and I looked at each other, confused. "I don't know," I answered. Angrily, my grandmother grabbed it and took it out of the house. My grandfather, visibly upset, explained that the crucifix belonged to one of my grandmother's aunts, who had always wanted it to remain above her grave. According to him, every generation was supposed to keep it, and eventually it would be passed down to someone else in the family. He didn't give us much more explanation, but he said that the figure and the crucifix were probably connected, though we didn't know how. From that day on, things calmed down, although we decided to move as soon as my parents were able to. Now, my brother has a small mark on his shoulder, something he didn't have when he was born. Still, it would be irresponsible to say that Mark appeared on the same day of the incident. Not long ago, my grandparents told us that footsteps can still be heard in that house, but we never experienced anything like that again.
First of all, I want to apologize for mentioning the witch's path in this story. I know it may be hard to believe, but I will tell the story just as my cousins and I remember it, although some details may differ. These are my memories along with the testimonies of those who lived the experience with me. I grew up in a small town just like my entire family. When my older brother reached university age, my parents made an effort, and we moved to the city so that he and later my siblings and I could study the career we wanted. Other relatives made similar decisions, while some uncles and cousins stayed in the town or emigrated in search of opportunities. Despite the distance, we continued visiting family, especially my father's older brother, a figure who, for many of us, played the role of a grandfather. In the town, legends are part of everyday life. There is talk of a boy who drowned in the river and whose appearance terrifies those who dare swim at dusk. It is also said that a woman wanders the streets on windy nights, among other stories that could be considered folklore. But some tales go beyond that. Since we were children, we heard stories about paranormal phenomena that seemed more real than we wanted to admit. On the outskirts of the town, there was a place known as the Witch's Path, where, according to locals, witches and sorcerers had always lived, visited by people from distant places. It was a feared sight, as it was rumored that those who dared challenge its limits suffered strange consequences. The people of the town, especially the ranchers, knew that it was better not to oppose these figures, as those who refused to cooperate suffered inexplicable losses in their livestock. When I was about 12 years old, girls began to disappear in the nearby city right around the time of the Day of the Dead. Alarmed, the people of the town demanded that the municipal president investigate those living on the Witch's Path. An operation was carried out, resulting in the arrest of an elderly man, while many of the houses in the area were abandoned. What was found there was terrifying: remnants of rituals, demonic figures, and remains of sacrificed animals. Human bones were also found, although none matched those of the missing girls. The case, far from being resolved, took a disturbing turn when the state police intervened. The elderly man was released, and it was ordered that the inhabitants of the area be left in peace. Over time, it became known that among the frequent visitors to the area was an influential figure in the government, which fueled even more speculation about what was really happening there. I have always had a great fascination with the occult and the mysteries surrounding that place. Also, every late October until the Day of the Dead, the town would be covered by a thick fog that added an even more enigmatic air to the stories. For this reason, every time I had the chance, I would return to the town during those dates. However, as my cousins and I grew older, it became harder to coordinate, as many worked and had responsibilities. Still, every year I would send out the invitation, hoping that someone would dare to join me. It was a few years ago, after making my invitation, that I realized that for the first time in a long time, no one else could go. This meant that unless I found another way, I wouldn't be able to make the trip as I couldn't afford the gasoline on my own. When I had resigned myself to not going, I received a call on Saturday morning. It was one of my younger cousins who told me she wanted to go. Her parents had some things to send to the town, so they were willing to cover the cost of fuel if we took care of the transportation. Although I should have been excited by the news, I was actually worried. For the first time, I would be the one driving to the town, and I would also be with someone younger, which meant a great responsibility. Still, I accepted, and that very afternoon we set out on the journey without imagining what awaited us. With the financial support of her parents, my younger cousin decided to accompany me to the town, as they had things to send. Although the idea of traveling again excited me, the responsibility of driving there for the first time unsettled me. It was the first time I was undertaking the trip without adults and with a minor in my charge. That very afternoon we set off, but before leaving, my uncle warned me about the road conditions. Several stretches were under repair and posed a danger. As we neared the town, a dense fog began to cover the road, completely blocking out the evening light. While my 15-year-old cousin entertained herself with music and sang nonstop, I tried to concentrate on driving, but an unsettling feeling took over me. Something or someone was watching us from the trees along the road. We advanced to a point where the road narrowed to a single lane, and the cars had to take turns to pass. However, there were no workers in sight, which made me realize that the area was completely deserted. Shortly after, a sign indicated a detour, and with no other option, I took a dirt road. The car began to struggle with the poor condition of the road, and soon after, I noticed there were no other vehicles in sight. I looked in the rearview mirror and confirmed what I feared. We were completely alone. "We're going to pass through the Witch's Path," my cousin said, with a mix of excitement and mockery, but her words froze my blood. The atmosphere became even more oppressive. The fog blocked the view beyond a few meters, and there was no cell phone signal. What had until then been an intriguing story had turned into a real experience I had to face. The dirt road worsened, and I was forced to slow down. We reached a point where, if we got out and walked, we would advance faster than in the car. The only thing running through my mind was the possibility of the car breaking down in the middle of nowhere. It was then that in the rearview mirror, I saw a figure running at an impossible speed toward us. My body froze and I tried to warn my cousin, but before I could react, the figure veered off and disappeared into the bushes. My mind tried to find an explanation. Was it an animal, someone on the road, or just an illusion caused by the tension of the moment? I didn't have time to figure it out when my cousin, who hadn't noticed the figure, pointed to an old woman walking slowly along the side of the road. My cousin insisted we should help the old woman, but I firmly refused. There was no way I was going to stop in that place, on that road. Before we reached her, the woman stopped and turned her face toward us. Her expression, full of anger, left me with a sense of unease. For some reason, I was certain she knew I wasn't planning to stop and help her. My cousin looked at me disapprovingly and called me a coward, insisting that I was old enough to stop believing in witch tales. Still, I ignored her words and continued driving with the sole intention of getting to the town as quickly as possible. The fog grew thicker and, without realizing it, I reached a dead end. The road abruptly ended at a hill covered in vegetation. I stopped suddenly, surprised. There was no visible fork in the road, no sign of having taken the wrong path. However, it was evident that we were lost. My cousin, now alarmed, asked me to turn around immediately. Carefully, I turned the car around on the narrow road, but the feeling of being watched did not go away. My uncle's warning about the road and the dangers of the Witch's Path echoed in my mind. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the figure I had seen running behind us and the furious look of the old woman. I felt as if something or someone had deliberately led us to this place. With fear running through my body, I drove back, hoping to find the right detour and get out of that cursed road. I was driving slowly, trying to stay calm, when my cousin screamed, pointing to a path covered with branches and fallen trees. We realized we wouldn't be able to pass in the car unless we cleared the path ourselves. I turned off the engine, leaving the doors open, more concerned about having a quick escape route than worrying about a potential thief. With trembling hands, we began to remove the branches one by one. The silence was absolute, with only the sound of our breathing and the crunching of the wood. A sudden gust of wind cleared part of the fog, allowing me to see clearly. Just over 100 meters away, the old woman was watching us, motionless in the darkness. The sense of danger became unbearable when the old woman began to walk slowly toward us. Although she moved with slow steps, every time I looked away and back, she seemed to be closer. My hands shook as I tried to remove the last branches, not caring if I cut myself in the process. My cousin, now completely terrified, climbed into the car and turned on the lights, illuminating the path we were about to continue on. It was then that I saw something even more disturbing. In front of us, on the same path, another figure was waiting. It was a man with a bare torso, but his head was not human. It looked like that of a horse or some strange beast. Something about his presence made me understand that it was not the first time he had found us that night. My survival instinct kicked in, and with one final effort, I cleared the path. I ran to the car with my heart racing at 1,000 beats per minute, while the old woman approached with her arms outstretched. Just before I got into the car, I saw her up close. Her face was marked by rage, with dark eyes and yellow, sharp teeth, as if she were a creature straight out of a nightmare. As soon as I slammed the door shut, I screamed at my cousin to accelerate, no matter what was ahead. My cousin stepped on the gas, but her scream of terror told me that something else was waiting for us. The humanoid figure, the creature with the beast's head, was now running alongside the window, staring at her with an expression impossible to describe. I felt as if it was hunting us. The car sped up as the beast kept pace with us. My cousin's screams turned into desperate crying, but we couldn't stop. After several meters, the creature finally disappeared into the darkness. I gathered the courage to look back, and although the figures were gone, something else left us uneasy. In the distance on the hill, small houses lit the mist with a faint light, and smoke was coming from inside them, as if someone were there, watching us. Everything defied logic, and the worst part was the feeling that we weren't completely safe. We kept driving without stopping until we finally arrived in the village. When we entered my uncle's house, we could barely speak. They received us with concern, seeing our pale faces and labored breathing. My cousin, in a state of crisis, could barely utter a word. When we finally managed to explain what had happened, my uncle looked at us gravely. "Why the hell did you go down the witch's path?" he asked. I explained that the road was closed, and there was no other option, but he shook his head. It wasn't completely closed, he assured us. According to him, there were always alternative routes that would have taken us there without problems. Even though my cousin supported my story about the detour, the rest of the family attributed everything to my lack of experience driving. However, days later, chilling news arrived. Tortured bodies had been found near the witch's path. No one could explain it, but we understood that we had been dangerously close to something much worse that night. The news confirmed what we had already suspected. The bodies found near the witch's path had been dead for several days, probably the same Saturday we passed through there. Although the media attributed it to organized crime, in the village, people spoke of something far more sinister. It was said that the police had found the bodies on the hills, arranged in circles with pentagrams and ritual signs. However, they were ordered to take them down to the road and make it appear as though they were victims of common violence, to avoid raising suspicion. In the village, even today, disappearances still occur. People prefer to think that those who are missing simply left without warning or emigrated in search of a better life. Though deep down, everyone fears that something much worse may have happened to them. Since then, returning to the village has become a dilemma. Every time I pass by the road and see the turnoff to the witch's path, a feeling of disgust and terror overwhelms me. I think of everything that might be happening there with complete impunity, of the things that will never be explained. That's why, even though I've been asked to return to try to record something or document it, there is no force on earth that could make me go back. Still, I leave the directions here in case someone else dares to walk that cursed path one day. My experience has been enough to understand that there are things in this world better left unchallenged. Thank you for reading.